My name is Kamyar Aram. I am a specialty crops farm advisor for Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And among the things that I have been studying and working on are cover crops. So I'm going to tell you today about basically an overview of cover cropping in orchards, as well as some of my own experience with trials. Now, I've got a lot of material here that I'm probably not going to get through, especially with the fact that we're a little over time here. So if there's any particular part of cover cropping that you would like to see emphasized, please put that in the chat and I'll try to address those things. Otherwise, it might be a little bit of a going through quickly in some parts and maybe emphasize things that I think might be helpful for you. Okay. So an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'll touch on concepts and principles of cover cropping, benefits and concerns, and then an overview of the practice itself, and managing some of the concerns, and hopefully I'll have a chance to touch on the results from some of my trials and things that I've learned. So I do want to highlight for you that we have quite a few resources from UC Cooperative Extension, UC Ag and Natural Resources on cover cropping, including these publications, which are available through our publications website. And also this cover crop best management practices was a collaboration of UC and the Almond Board, and is a great resource for cover crops and orchards in general. Also, I recently discovered this website by, I think it's hosted by the UC Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, SAREP. And it has really wonderful resources, but one of the things that's really nice is grower profiles. And I think cover crops are a topic that really benefit from learning from other farmers and practitioners. And there's some really nice profiles here. I'll highlight, I also have a bunch of videos that I've made, so I'll mention those again at the end. Okay, so really quickly, what are cover crops? We're talking about, these are annual field crops, like legumes, grasses, and mustards that are grown for the purpose of protecting and improving the soil. So in orchards, these are really planted in the middles, and they generally produce more biomass than what the resident vegetation that would naturally grow there. And the benefits accrue over years. So this is kind of like things you do to benefit your health. You know, short term might show you some benefits, but really it's something that you adopt as a practice or for the long term. Why cover crop? Well, you know, the main reason I think many people adopt them is just to cultivate a healthy, well-functioning soil over time that would ultimately benefit your cash crop. But they're also used for addressing specific management concerns or goals, like improving water infiltration or managing nitrogen or providing pollinator forage. So there are cover crops can be divided into some categories. You know, we do have like summer cover crops. You might see like grasses. Any of you who have, let's say, U-pick operations often probably have grass growing in between during the summer, during the growing season. Some cover crops are perennial or they reseed over years, but really most of what I'm going to focus on is winter cover cropping, because this is grown in the orchard middle in the rainy season, which is our cool season, or in our winter, when the trees, most trees, deciduous trees that we cultivate in the region are dormant, they don't have any leaves. And we typically terminate this cover crop in the spring before the growing season begins. That's what I'll be focusing on today. Now,
Kami,
there are many.
oh, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to jump in quickly because I know once you start sharing your screen, sometimes it's hard to see the chat and the Q&A. But since you asked for requests, you have a couple
Oh,
now.
thank you. I
So
do have the chat open, so
okay,
uh,
great. So you can see those, and in the Q&A there
uh,
was
I should have acknowledged. Thank you, Lucy.
okay,
So yeah,
great.
I'll address for newer plantings and the other second question about microbiome. We'll be touching on all those. So
Okay. Yeah, and
um,
there's in the
thank you.
Q&A there was a question about cover crop versus thick mulch.
Oh, okay. We'll try to get to all that too. Great, thank you. So yeah, so some of the benefits, soil health, of course, is on the top of the list here. Water infiltration can be improved, nutrient management, we'll talk about that. Early access in the spring or even in the winter during wet conditions is actually another advantage. A degree of weed suppression, and then carbon sequestration as a kind of broader environmental goal. I'll be touching on all this again a little bit more in detail. This is just to give you an overview. And then some of the concerns are water use. Of course, we've had good conditions in recent years in Northern California, but drought is never too far from our minds. Frost risk is another concern. I'll talk more about these again. Cost, of course, there is a cost to added operations for planting. Can you get winter orchard activities done if you've got a cover crop growing? Pests, can cover crops and kind of make pest issues worse. And then for nuts, whether there'll be residues on the ground in harvest. So I'll address all these as we go through. Just an overview of the benefits versus the concerns. Now, just touching on what soil health means, really, we're talking about increased organic matter in the soil, which will improve the physical function, structure, water infiltration, and erosion protection, and also the biological function, nutrient cycling, aeration, disease suppression, possibly. For water infiltration, cover crop roots can open channels, organic matter improves soil aggregation, pore structure. Organic matter also increases water holding capacity. Uh, and cover and organic matter also reduce or prevent crusting. So here's good, you might have seen these tests of soil aggregation where you put a clump of soil in a cup of water and see how fast it falls apart. This is a nice picture of showing just, between the unplanted tree row and the cover crop, just the crusting difference there. And then for nutrient management side of things, legumes contribute nitrogen, and then all cover crops, forage nitrogen and hold it throughout the winter. And then when you terminate them in the spring, we'll reintroduce some of that back into the soil. And of course, increasing organic matter improves nutrient cycling and holding capacity of soil. If you have a good stand, especially grasses are good for kind of managing moisture and giving you attractive surface so you can get into the field when more wet conditions. You can imagine that when you have bare soil, no chance of getting in during wet weather. This is especially good for when this was actually a field that was being planted. It hadn't been planted yet. And so you can see very thoughtful of the grower to have planted a thick bed of triticale, a grass, to kind of provide that surface so that they could get into the field and plant early in the season. And you can also kind of see that this kind of dense growth will also prevent weeds from growing. Weed suppression also depends on the quality of the stand, the seeding density, and of course, the non-planted area, which is the tree row, usually is not planted, will need some kind of weed control. Often herbicides are used and are compatible with cover cropping if you just direct them to the tree row. And in the spring, if you don't incorporate the cover crop, you you can actually use it as a kind of mulch that will suppress weeds for a while. This is kind of a nice comparison of ground. On the far left, you have bare ground. In the middle, you have this nice chopped cover crop mulch, and which retains moisture and suppresses weeds to an extent. And then on the right, you have kind of the worst case scenario where you have bindweed just growing on a bare ground. Carbon sequestration is another environmental benefit. It is not really a production goal necessarily, but it is a state priority and is part of why the state often has incentive programs like the California Healthy Soils grants or USDA EQIP grants for environmental quality that can help you cover some of the costs of cover cropping. So the Resource Conservation District and NRCS are great resources to reach out to learn more about opportunities for covering the cost of cover cropping. And the Seeds for Bees program is still active and great source for planting cover crops that benefit pollinators. So I'm going to kind of go through quickly again. Cover crops typically can be categorized as grasses, legumes, and mustards. They all have different qualities that they contribute, and they can be planted alone or in combinations. So grasses are fast germinating. They're good at foraging nitrogen. They have abundant fibrous roots that can open up fine pores in the soil. They contribute a lot of carbon-rich biomass, but because of that, they're a little slower to decompose. And then we have certain cultivars, especially of triticale, that have a lot of root biomass production, but they don't produce a lot of above ground biomass, which can be nice if you, something that you can still allows you to pass through the orchard even while you've got a cover crop growing. Legumes, of course, have this symbiosis with bacteria in their nodules that fix nitrogen. That is, they capture atmospheric nitrogen and they can add it to the soil. Because of the high nitrogen content, they will decompose quickly. So that's an advantage in certain cases, especially if you don't want residues to linger. They're generally large seeded, so they can survive drought a little bit better than grasses and mustards. Clovers can be perennial or reseeding, and they're also a low-growing legume. And then they do provide flowers that can benefit pollinators. Mustards are fast-growing also. They provide abundant flowers for pollinators, so that's one of the main reasons they're planted. They also have really great large tap roots that can produce channels in the soil. And they can produce a lot of biomass if they're left to grow late into the season. They may suppress nematodes. That's kind of a tricky subject that requires kind of a dedicated presentation on its own. If you're interested in that element, that is something to look into or consult with me about further. And then there are mixes, which are blends of all these different kinds of cover crops. And they're a good way to hedge your bets so you can get a good stand between kind of more drought tolerant and more fast establishing ones, because seasonal conditions will vary from year to year. And I forgot to mention, but for winter cover crops, we're relying entirely on winter rains. We don't really want to irrigate cover crops. And so with these mixes, you have a better chance of having a consistent stand. It may look different from year to year, but your chances are better of getting a decent cover crop every year. And then you can balance carbon and nitrogen for decomposition. And there are a lot of pre-made mixes available from seed companies. So the cover crop planting processes basically can be divided into the planning, planting, and then the growth and termination phases. And these are roughly where they fall in the season. We're planting in October and November, so we're planning ahead of that. And then we're terminating. Early termination would be in February or March. later termination in maybe April, and very late would be May. So the planning phase is really to assess your needs and your strategy, calculate the planting area, remembering that you're really just planting the middles, and the width is based on a number of factors, including your equipment, how many passes you're willing to make. So how wide your mower is, how wide your seeder is. Um, then you select and order seeds, and also think about your termination equipment. All those things should be considered before you get into it. And then ahead of planting, you really just need light ground preparation in most cases, unless your ground is somehow very compacted and hard. A little scratching with a spring harrow or light disking, maybe just one, maybe two passes should be enough. A grain drill or a no-chill drill are really ideal for planting cover crop. But of course, you can actually use spreaders either on, ATVs. And if you have a small enough uh, area to plant, you can really use these hand spreaders even. You can get amazing coverage with those. And of course, it's always important to calibrate your planting equipment for the right seeding rate. As you can see in the upper right picture here, seeds, especially if they're not drilled, and even sometimes when they are drilled, will be kind of lying exposed. So it's really important to have some kind of practice for making good seed contact, usually a roller or a chain harrow, nothing heavy, just a light thing to press or cover the soil so that you get good seed soil contact. Key for germination. And then you can apply a pre-emergent spray or other practices for controlling weeds in the tree row before or after your seeding. Generally, you'll keep the tree row free. You won't be planting cover crop there, and you'll want to keep it clean from weeds. But it is ideal, the benefit of cover crops really does depend on how much of the orchard floor you're covering. So if you've got a tiny little strip in the middle, it's probably not going to benefit you as much as if you've got a wider cover in that orchard middle. And we want to seed really just ahead of winter rains. Now, if you have sprinkler irrigation and if rains are late, that could help. You could do one irrigation to get things going. And we want to plant so that we have germination before leaf drop. This is especially important in large leaf crops like walnuts in particular. And like I mentioned, yes, if you've got sprinkler irrigation, that can help get things started. In the winter, you can really just watch the cover crop grow, and it's a very beautiful thing to watch. You can monitor for gophers and other pests that might be of concern. There's a recommendation if you have weeds that actually grow faster than your cover crop, you can do a high mow to try to control those. And certain winter activities can still be done, like pruning, shaking mummies. You can do these basically if you don't have a lot of biomass, and some of the cover crops will tolerate more being driven over, but often you can just plant in alternate rows and just have your cover crop in every other row and have a row open for doing winter orchard activities. Let's see. Okay. So when it comes time for termination, that's usually, like I mentioned, somewhere between February and April, maybe May. Time is of the essence. And we really want to go for maximum biomass, but also conserve moisture. So we want to terminate the crop, sometime soon after the last rains have come in. Don't want to, because the cover crop is using water. And that's usually balanced by how much water it helps absorb into the field. But once moisture stops being added, it can dry out the orchard quite quickly. Um, Also, if you're providing habitat for beneficials or for pollinators, you want to make sure that you have at least some close overlap with bloom. Sometimes you can just leave a strip every so often to kind of keep the beneficials still there. And also, you don't want to let the cover crop get too big so that you can't really manage the residue. I haven't seen this actually be a problem. So cover crops really grow fast from mid-May to April once the temperatures warm up. You can see those pictures here. Uh, they kind of come along slowly in the winter, and then once the warmer temperatures hit, they really grow. But even with that picture in the bottom there with all those mustards, there was no real residue problem. So you really have to wait late to get residues that are hard to break down. And that might be something you desire. So you could manage for that. Generally, cover crops are terminated by mowing. A flail mower chops things really fine and is really I think, the ideal option, but a rotary mower will work too. If desired, especially if you want to add a lot of nitrogen to the soil and you've got legumes growing, then disking in can be helpful. There's a rolling and crimping. I don't have a picture of that, but that's just when you kind of knock the cover crop down and in place. That's an advanced technique that maybe we'll address somewhere sometime later, but is an option. Oh, and like I said, yeah, that you can see kind of working the cover crop in that lower picture. So key considerations are water use, your soil type, what kind of winter and late fall activities you need to do, pollinator support. There's some concern folks can have about whether the cover crop will actually draw pollinators away from the blossoms of the trees. That is generally never, I have not seen that really considered a major problem, but it can be a concern. Frost, I'll talk about a little bit more, can be a concern. Some cover crops, mainly legumes, might support nematodes, so something to think about. Gophers and other rodents, and then costs versus benefits. We'll touch on these. So water use can be controlled with timely termination. You should be monitoring moisture as we get into the spring and drier weather to make sure you terminate your cover crop in advance of when it will really dry the orchard out. Frost risk is something that is often mentioned. It's not really clear how much of a concern it should be or it is, but research showed some time ago that bare soil absorbs more heat during the day, especially bare moist soil, holds more sun heat from the day and radiates it back at night, reducing potentially the risk of frost. But more research is going on now to really try to figure this out because it's considered that actually cover crops can actually help moderate orchard temperatures favorably. However, the current recommendation is if there is a frost risk that you mow to terminate the cover crop. And this can be tricky if you've got a large area. So the general recommendation would be if you are in a frost-prone area, either to just plant low-growing cover crops that you can easily get through and mow very quickly down less than 2 inches, or to just get in and terminate the cover crop before bloom. So here's an example of some low-growing cover crops. And it's actually, this was a volunteer burr clover, but I think it's a nice example of how clover can be in there with a grass. This is a low-growing cover crop. This is a vineyard, but you can see haven't had bud break yet, and they're already terminating their cover crop here. So that's, you can get in there ahead of bloom or bud break to make sure that you don't have a frost risk. However, this is cherry orchard in full bloom with a kind of low growing but mixed cover crop. You can actually see some wheel tracks there. So this cover crop has been driven over. So in places where you're not uh, prone to frost, this is shouldn't be a concern. For winter orchard tasks, um, basically you can leave every other row open so that you can get in there and you can take your prunings and stuff and throw in there. Of course, you can actually throw your prunings right in with the cover crop. And uh, if you've got a strong enough mower, it should be no problem to grind and chop the cover crop and the prunings at the same time. I've seen that done effectively. This is a nice example, another walnut orchard in San Joaquin County with alternate rows planted. And if you want to get really ambitious, I think you could even plant, let's say, a large biomass producing multi-mix in every other row and plant a low growing grass like this triticale. This is from my trial, but you can kind of see, conceptualize how that might look like. It's, of course, extra work, but uh, if you're not getting a lot of biomass in those unplanted rows, it could be helpful. So rodents can be a concern. I mean, in theory, and I guess in some experience, gophers do find cover crops good things to feed on. But I haven't seen in my trials particularly increased rodent activity, gopher activity. I do see gopher activity. But something, if you have a major gopher issue, it's best probably to try to control that before you start cover cropping. And you should be monitoring rodent activity, gopher activity in particular, throughout the winter just to make sure that the cover crop is not making it worse and come up with a strategy for the following year if you see an uptick. I mentioned certain cover crops, particularly legume cultivars, might actually increase some of the plant parasitic pest nematodes. So if you have nematode issues in the orchard already, that's something to consult with your seed company to make sure you don't plant anything that could potentially be a host. I haven't seen that be a major problem. So, of course, there is a cost to cover cropping. You really have to consider seed, equipment, your fuel, and some labor just for getting through the rows. How many passes you're willing to make can help inform your decisions. I suggest always starting small and experimenting and taking advantage of incentive programs like the ones I mentioned earlier. And I see some questions coming through the chat that I'll hopefully be answering soon. Let's see, I've got probably just a few minutes left. So I know a lot of folks are probably wondering, well, I just have a resident vegetation. Isn't that good enough? And it's a great question. And if you've got something like this is like a wonderful little crop of Fillory or cranesbill. And that's a good amount of biomass growing right there. Of course, it's kind of narrow, so maybe I would encourage a wider strip there and maybe a more narrow herbicide strip in the row. But yeah, if you've got good biomass growing, then maybe you don't need a cover crop. Of course, these most weeds that will volunteer are faster growing, shallow rooted, and will kind of go to seed quickly. That's what they've evolved to do. And of course, if you've got something more like this, it's probably not doing a great amount of good for your soil. So this might not be for the faint at heart. You've got some stuff even growing in the tree row, but this kind of cover probably does a lot of good for your soil. So somewhere in a happy medium, a compromise, but you really want to maximize, the trees are growing in the tree row. They do have roots throughout the orchard floor, but if you've just got a little narrow strip in the middle of the orchard middle and like completely bare soil everywhere, it's you're probably not building your soil a whole lot. So it's a lot of trade-offs. And this was a nice field day by Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and you could really see this is actually just comparison of the soil in the tree row of that orchard you were just looking at, um, this one right here. So from the tree row, which was uh, mainly bare, to with the cover cropped center, and I bet you can probably guess which one is which in terms of just soil structure and color. So, and I am going to go ahead and, yeah, you know, soil quality, soil health is something is really tangible. I mean, you can just see the aggregation in this clump, the way that the soil kind of crumbles but sticks together. Really, that's that's the main goal of cover cropping. It improves a lot of agronomic qualities. Um, So I think I'm gonna actually, you can find out about my cover crop trial more from my web page, and I'm going to skip forward through all this. I actually have a blog. If I can just um, okay, let's just go here. Yeah, so you can read more about my cover crop trial at the my blog there, and can access. I have some great videos on YouTube and Instagram. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to stop right there. I might just address a few questions if we have time. Um, so drought tolerant cover crop for summer. Um, yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think really we're probably talking about grasses. I want to look into that more. I don't have a lot to tell you right now, but I think there are uh, different grasses and that can form a dense canopy and suppress weeds in the summer. Challenge there, of course, is that you're um, needing to water them, or you end up watering them and they take some water from your orchard. And in California, that can be, uh, you know, not ideal. But there's also other grasses that I haven't looked into a great deal, but I think I'll use this as a prompt to learn a little bit more about, which actually will stop growing when they're not watered. So if you're on drip irrigation, something like that could be really beneficial. Didn't talk too much about the difference between drip and sprinkler irrigated orchards, but that's kind of a big thing, especially for managing residue. If you're on sprinklers and you're wetting the whole orchard floor, you're going to get more decomposition more quickly. If you're on drip, then if you produced a lot of biomass in the winter, that's going to probably linger because unless you incorporate it. And I actually have a trial to experiment with that this year. So maybe more about that next time. Incentive programs, you can revisit the slide set or the recording there. But basically, please reach out to your resource conservation district or NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and also seeds for bees if you grow uh, flowering trees that would benefit from pollinators.